Something powerful just happened in the United States Senate, and it has sent shockwaves all the way to Nigeria. A move that no one saw coming. A decision that could shake the political foundation of Nigeria's leadership and expose years of silence in the face of brutality. U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, known for his firm stance on justice and human rights, has submitted a brand new bill before the U.S. Senate. The bill, titled the Nigeria Religious Freedom Accountability Act of 2025, aims to bring real consequences to anyone supporting or tolerating mass killings in Nigeria. This is not a rumor. It is not another social media post filled with claims and counterclaims. It is an official document, labeled S.2747, and entered into the record of the U.S. Congress. This bill seeks to compel the U.S. Secretary of State to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern, a title reserved for nations that continuously allow or encourage religious persecution without meaningful action to stop it. According to the content of the bill, any government official, governor, legislator, or individual who promotes or enforces blasphemy laws, or tolerates violence against people based on religion, would be placed under immediate sanctions. These sanctions could include visa bans, asset freezes, and other financial restrictions. In simple terms, the bill will hit directly at those who have turned a blind eye to the slaughter of innocent citizens in Nigeria. For years, reports of attacks on Christian communities, kidnappings, and church burnings have flooded international media. Many global organizations have repeatedly raised concerns that these killings are being ignored or downplayed by those in power. Despite the cries of families and communities, justice has often been slow or non-existent. But now, this move from the United States brings a new kind of attention, one that could no longer be ignored. Senator Ted Cruz's action sends a strong message: the world is watching Nigeria. This bill is not just a piece of paper. It represents the frustration of countless people around the world who have witnessed years of violence, silence, and political excuses. It represents an attempt to finally call those responsible to account. When the news broke, reactions poured in across social media, diplomatic circles, and newsrooms. Political analysts described it as a wake-up call for Nigeria's government. Others said this might be the beginning of a turning point, where world powers start to hold African leaders responsible for human rights violations within their borders. And right at the center of all this is Nigeria's President, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Observers say the development came as a surprise to his administration, which has been trying to maintain international partnerships while dealing with the deepening crisis at home. But now, with a U.S. senator introducing a bill that directly challenges the government's handling of religious violence, Tinubu's team may be facing one of its biggest diplomatic tests yet. What makes this even more significant is the timing. The bill arrives at a moment when Nigeria is already struggling with economic hardship, insecurity, and public discontent. For many Nigerians, this new U.S. action feels like justice long delayed. It echoes the cries of families who lost loved ones in attacks that were never properly investigated, and it reignites a global conversation about accountability. The language of the bill itself is strong and direct. It names the problem without hesitation. It calls for punishment of anyone who enforces or tolerates religious persecution, whether through lawmaking, public advocacy, or even silence. In clear terms, it recognizes that inaction can be as deadly as direct participation in violence. This kind of foreign policy move is rare and serious. When the U.S. Senate labels a country of particular concern, it places it in the same category as nations like North Korea, Iran, and Myanmar, countries long criticized for human rights abuses. Such a designation would not just harm Nigeria's image, it could also affect international trade, diplomatic relations, and even access to certain forms of foreign aid. That is why the moment the news spread, many political commentators said one thing: Tinubu won't like this. Because this bill, if passed, would mean that the U.S. government is officially recognizing failures in Nigeria's leadership to protect its people. It would mean that global attention is now focused on Abuja. And it would mean that Nigerian politicians who thought they could escape accountability might soon find themselves under international scrutiny. Across Nigeria, the reaction has been mixed. Some people are celebrating the move, calling it justice from abroad for the voiceless victims of domestic failure. Others, especially those close to the corridors of power, are calling it interference in Nigeria's internal affairs. But regardless of the opinions, one thing is clear: the conversation has changed. For the first time in years, a powerful figure in Washington is directly linking Nigeria's leadership to the ongoing killings and persecution happening within its borders. And for the countless Nigerians who have prayed, protested, and pleaded for the world to listen, this could be the moment when hope finally returns. This bill represents more than politics. It represents justice for those who were killed simply for believing differently. It represents a warning to those who use religion as a weapon. And it represents the beginning of a possible shift in how the international community deals with countries that allow violence to continue unchecked. The message is simple but strong: the world has seen enough bloodshed, and the time for silence is over. And that is why, as the sun rises over Abuja and the conversations continue in Washington, the weight of this bill hangs heavily in the air, a sign that justice, though delayed, might finally be on its way. Now, let's talk about what this bill really means, not just for Nigeria, but for the people who have suffered quietly for years. The bill introduced by U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, known officially as S.2747, is not an ordinary motion or a symbolic statement. It is a direct legislative demand for accountability. It instructs the U.S. Secretary of State to officially classify Nigeria as a country of particular concern, a serious international label given to nations where human rights, especially religious freedom, are repeatedly violated. This classification is not just a name. It comes with real consequences. Once a country is placed on that list, the United States government is legally empowered to impose heavy sanctions on that nation's officials. That means Nigerian leaders, from federal ministers to governors, judges, and even military officers, could face restrictions they have never seen before. The bill outlines that any Nigerian official who has promoted, defended, or enforced blasphemy laws, or even tolerated acts of religious violence, would be targeted. These people would be banned from entering the United States. Their foreign bank accounts could be frozen. Their assets, businesses, and international privileges could be restricted or completely cut off. And this is where the message becomes powerful. Because for years, the world has watched reports of violence against Christians in Nigeria: villages burned, families displaced, churches destroyed, and innocent people murdered simply for their faith. The numbers have been staggering, and yet the reaction from those in authority has too often been silence or denial. Ted Cruz's bill is designed to end that silence. It calls for punishment not only for those who carry out these attacks but also for those in power who look away. It recognizes that failing to act is as dangerous as the violence itself. The bill makes it clear: any government that refuses to protect its citizens from religious killings is complicit in the crime. What makes this development even more striking is that it did not come from human rights activists or journalists, it came directly from the floor of the U.S. Senate. That gives it political weight and international force. It means the issue has now moved beyond moral sympathy and into the realm of U.S. law and foreign policy. In other words, the United States is no longer just watching Nigeria, it is preparing to act. Now imagine the impact. If this bill passes into law, it will pressure the Nigerian government like never before. Every act of violence, every case of religious discrimination, and every ignored warning will become part of an official international record. Nigerian officials would be under the global microscope, and those who fail to uphold justice could face sanctions personally. For President Bola Tinubu and his administration, this is a diplomatic time bomb. Nigeria has always valued its relationship with the United States, a key trade partner, security ally, and international supporter. But this bill threatens to redefine that relationship. It says clearly, friendship cannot continue if Nigeria refuses to confront the killings and protect religious freedom. This also carries financial risks. Nigeria depends heavily on foreign investment, global loans, and partnerships with Western countries. Sanctions could scare away investors and make it harder for Nigeria to access funds or military cooperation. The consequences could ripple through the economy, the banking sector, and even international travel for Nigerian officials. But beyond politics and economics, there's a deeper meaning. For ordinary Nigerians, those who have lost loved ones in brutal attacks, this bill represents long-awaited recognition. It shows that somewhere in the halls of power in Washington, someone finally listened. Someone finally acknowledged the pain that has been ignored for too long. The bill is also a warning to those in Nigeria who misuse religion for political gain or power. It tells them that the world is watching, and there will be a price for every act of hate that goes unpunished. It reminds leaders that authority comes with responsibility, and that failing to defend the weak is not strength, it is complicity. This move by Senator Cruz could also inspire other nations to act. Internationally, once the US takes a firm stance, other Western countries often follow. It sets a diplomatic chain reaction that could lead to coordinated global sanctions, bans, and even investigations. That means this is not just an American action, it could become an international effort for justice. In the eyes of many human rights groups, this bill is long overdue. They have spent years calling for stronger measures, arguing that words of condemnation mean nothing if killers and enablers continue to walk free. Now, with this bill on the table, there is finally hope that those calls are being answered. For Nigeria's leadership, it's a challenge and a test. How will the government respond? Will it dismiss the bill as foreign interference, or will it take it as a serious signal to address the deep divisions tearing communities apart? Will it finally act to protect every citizen equally, Christian, Muslim, or otherwise, or continue to deny the reality on the ground? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain, the world is no longer staying silent. The United States has put its position in writing, in law, and in motion. The moment the bill was submitted, the conversation changed from sympathy to accountability. This is what the Nigeria Religious Freedom Accountability Act of 2025 truly represents, the beginning of global consequences for local failures. It is a political, moral, and diplomatic line drawn in the sand. For the victims, it's a glimmer of justice. For the perpetrators, it's a warning. And for Nigeria's leaders, it's a question of truth, conscience, and courage. The era of silence may be ending. And the world, through the voice of one determined US senator, has finally said, enough is enough. When news of Senator Ted Cruz's bill reached Abuja, it did not take long before the corridors of power went quiet. Inside the presidency, the reaction was a mix of disbelief and unease. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who was already facing growing criticism over Nigeria's economic crisis and insecurity, now found himself at the center of a new kind of storm, an international one. According to reports from diplomatic sources, the first response inside the government was confusion. Many of Tinubu's advisors initially dismissed the story as social media exaggeration. But as official documents from the US Senate began circulating online, showing the full text of the bill labeled S.2747, the reality hit hard. This was not a rumor. It was an official legislative action from Washington, D.C., and its language was direct and uncompromising. The Nigerian government knew what such a move meant. A bill introduced by a senior US senator like Ted Cruz does not appear out of thin air. It represents growing frustration within international circles about the Nigerian government's failure to stop religious killings and protect human rights. It also signals that conversations have already been happening behind the scenes, conversations that suggest powerful nations are losing patience. For President Tinubu, this development was personal and political. His administration has tried to present itself as reform-minded and capable of restoring Nigeria's global image. But this bill, if passed, could paint a very different picture, one of negligence, silence, and complicity. Government spokespersons struggled to find the right words. On one hand, they wanted to defend Nigeria's sovereignty, claiming that such actions from foreign lawmakers amount to interference in internal matters. On the other hand, they understood the gravity of the situation. This was the United States, Nigeria's biggest diplomatic partner and one of its largest foreign investors, now openly questioning the government's moral and political credibility. What made matters worse was that this news did not remain within American borders. Just hours after the story spread across US media, Canadian opposition leaders raised their voices too. They called for their own government to take a stand for religious freedom in Nigeria. Some even went as far as to push for sanctions against individuals linked to violence and persecution. And then came another blow. Reports began circulating that a Canadian court had allegedly listed Nigeria's ruling party, the All Progressives Congress, APC, as a terrorist-linked organization due to alleged ties with violent groups in northern Nigeria. Whether or not that classification would hold, the story gained massive traction online. It became the talk of both political and diplomatic platforms, sparking debates about Nigeria's internal politics and its growing reputation abroad. Suddenly, it was not just an American issue. The movement had become international. From Washington to Ottawa, lawmakers and human rights groups began connecting dots that Nigeria's leadership had long tried to separate. They were no longer treating the killings in Jos, Kaduna, Benue, or Plateau as isolated local conflicts. Instead, they were viewing them as symptoms of government negligence, and that, for Tinubu, was the real danger. Diplomatic analysts believe this could mark the beginning of a new kind of pressure on Nigeria's leadership. Sanctions from the United States and Canada could quickly spread to the European Union, the United Kingdom, and other allied nations. Once one major power acts, others often follow. And with global attention growing, the Nigerian government's ability to dismiss these claims as propaganda becomes weaker by the day. In the streets of Nigeria, reactions have been sharp and emotional. Many ordinary citizens, especially those who have lost loved ones to attacks, have welcomed the bill as long overdue justice. They say if the Nigerian government won't protect its own people, then maybe the world should step in. For them, Ted Cruz's action represents hope, the kind of hope that has been missing for too long. However, inside political circles, there's fear. Some politicians worry that they could be directly targeted if their names appear in the reports that the U.S. State Department would be required to submit under this law. The bill clearly mentions sanctions for federal officials, state governors, or other authorities who promote or tolerate religious persecution. That clause has set off quiet panic among certain powerful figures. For Tinubu himself, the implications go beyond personal image. This could complicate Nigeria's access to loans, foreign aid, and military support from Western countries. It could also affect foreign investments, especially if Nigeria's name becomes associated with religious violence and human rights violations. Global investors watch these developments closely, and no country wants to be labeled as a place unsafe for religious minorities or political dissent. The president now faces a choice. He can either treat this as foreign interference and try to rally nationalistic support at home, or he can seize the moment to show leadership by confronting the real issues head-on. That means ordering independent investigations, ending impunity, and ensuring that every Nigerian, regardless of faith, is protected under the law. But even if Tinubu chooses reform, the world will not forget easily. The past decade of killings, kidnappings, and community destruction has left deep scars. Families have been displaced, children orphaned, and entire towns reduced to ashes. These are not just statistics, they are lives that demand accountability. And now, through this bill, the international system is echoing those cries. Canada's involvement makes the situation even more serious. When multiple Western governments begin aligning their views on a human rights issue, it often leads to a coordinated global response. If the US Congress passes this bill, and Canada follows through on its own parliamentary motions, Nigeria could soon face widespread diplomatic and financial isolation. And so, as the debate continues, the tension rises. In Abuja, government officials hold late-night meetings, trying to plan a strategy. In Washington and Ottawa, human rights advocates push for faster action. And around the world, Nigerians in the diaspora are watching closely, many of them saying, finally, the world is beginning to understand. For the victims who lost everything, this is more than politics. It is justice, justice that may come from far away, but still matters deeply at home. As the pressure builds, one truth becomes clear: Nigeria's government can no longer hide behind words. The world is paying attention, and silence will no longer protect those in power. This is a new era of accountability. And for President Tinubu, it may be the toughest test of his leadership, not from opposition parties, not from local protests, but from the global community demanding one thing: justice for the innocent.